Okay, so I don't know if I want to kick this off by saying I want to respond to Sargon of Akkad, or I ought to thank Sargon of Akkad, because responding to a couple of Sargon of Akkad videos is what I'm doing here. But I should thank him, really. I cycled to work last night and cycled home this morning, about an hour and a half in each direction. And it was his material, amongst a few of the things, that on this occasion wheeled away the miles. But there was a few points that came up to me as a result of listening to his videos. And there's sometimes a criticism of YouTube is people just rehashing the same shit. Somebody watches something, makes an argument, somebody else just does the same fucking thing. And I agree with that. That's a waste of time, especially a channel with my reach compared to a channel with Sargon's reach. I'm not going to make a video and just make the same arguments that he made. I wouldn't bother doing that. I hope to add a little bit more value added than that. But there was a few things that he didn't say that I thought was worth saying. So that's what I want to do. It's not so much to naysay what he said, in actual fact, just to add some different points. The first was, I will need to go through a couple of bits that he went through just to put you in the picture of what this was about. This Week in Stupid, the 10th of this month, the 9th September 2017, or 9th of the 10th 2017 if you live in the United States and get your dates the wrong way round. And this was a Guardian. It was on the Guardian Online. It was an opinion piece, but an opinion piece by a Labour MP, right? Not a fucking nobody like you or I, but a Labour MP, entitled "The Grooming of Girls in Newcastle is not an issue of race, it's about misogyny, it's about the hatred of women, and that's what we should be making it about." And she subtitled it by opening with the question, what's worse, rape or racism, which is a question she said she'd been asking herself. Now, Sargon ably criticised her for that, and I don't know that I have much to add for that, other than to say asking which is worse, rape or racism, is akin to saying which is worse, gassing Jews or sexism. I think you're taking the very, very pinnacle, the very worst, most abhorrent example of one thing and placing it alongside a very, very broad category of something else, which includes some very, very minor things within it, and then feeling the need to ask yourself which one of these things is worse. I think if you're having to ask yourself that question, you maybe ought to be seeking psychological assistance rather than writing opinion pieces for The Guardian Online. But an opinion piece for The Guardian Online was written nonetheless. And what this was to do with these grooming of girls, and not gang rapes, but rape gangs, which I think is a step up, I think, from a gang rape. A gang rape, I suppose, is akin to a murder versus genocide. I think a gang rape could just be a single spur of the moment, unplanned occurrence, which involved multiple perpetrators and one victim. What we're talking about here is something that's a level beyond that went on for months or years in some cases, involved a couple of dozen individuals in some cases, involved, we believe, hundreds of victims in some cases, of predominantly white non-Muslim victims and Muslim perpetrators, mostly of Pakistani origin, and involved these girls being groomed and exploited, plied with drink and drugs over a period of time, and repeatedly placed in situations in which they didn't have any control, and they were systematically raped and sexually abused. This is pretty fucking heavy stuff we're talking about here. And this is not the first time this has happened. There have now been numerous cases that have come to trial, and people have been found guilty of them, and on each and every case it has involved, I'm afraid to say, almost uniquely Muslim men, mainly of Pakistani origin. Because that's the situation, but not uniquely of Pakistani origin. And so this woman wrote this article, and I'm not going to go through all the whys and wherefores and all of that lot. But what was interesting is that the thrust of her article was that we shouldn't make this an issue of race or religion. We shouldn't dwell on the fact that these are Muslim men or that they're mainly of Pakistani origin, even though that is true, even though we can see there is some correlation between these rape gangs and being a Muslim and being of Pakistani origin, we should kind of blinker ourselves to that. That it would be much more progressive and idealistic of us to forget about that and actually look at a bigger picture, right? But her bigger picture in many ways, this is the interesting bit, is that almost in a view to show off her credentials here, what she actually does is show off her, what I believe are her subconscious prejudices, is that she's throwing off these shackles as she sees it, of viewing this as a Muslim issue or a Pakistani origin issue, but she doesn't throw off the shackles of it being a male issue. She's still prepared to couch it in those terms. But why? Right? If you can look at something like this that is predominantly a Muslim issue, predominantly a Pakistani issue, predominantly a male issue, why is it the right thing to do to throw off the first two, but not the right thing to do to take out the gendered element and say, hey, anybody can commit sexual assault? I thought about that as I cycled to work actually after this had finished, and my immediate thought was that this was her conscious decision to do so, but I'm not sure that it was. I think this is an example of her unconscious prejudices and biases. In actual fact, she talks about misogyny, but her biases with regard to men. And I'll tell you, having read the article, which is what made me think this, she says this, listen, just juxtapose these two things that she puts. After tabloid headlines about Muslim rapists, one of my constituents who was himself raped as a child expresses concern that his abuse did not raise the same kind of outrage and therefore the same level of awareness. So she is aware here. Here is a male victim of sexual assault, of rape, as she puts it. But then listen to her last paragraph. So which is worse, rape or racism? The answer, of course, is to reject any such choice. Well, now, as Sargon said, the answer is rape, but okay, let's not dwell on that one. Right, listen to this. We must seek, and listen how gendered all of this. Think, just given that she's given an example of a man who was raped, right, and put this as an example of why we need to see the bigger picture. Just now look how she now focuses down and totally ignores this guy. She said, well, this guy was ignored, and if we deal with this as a Muslim problem, as a Pakistani problem, anything, we're going to ignore this kind of guy. Listen how she now utterly ignores this guy she was now talking about. We must seek out and eradicate misogyny and sexism wherever it may be. Condemn absolutely those who would judge and disrespect women and girls on the basis of their appearance or background. Recognise that male violence against women has no race and no religion. Invest in the measures necessary to prevent others becoming victims, blah, blah, blah. The rest of that paragraph is irrelevant. So I just kind of tickled me a little bit there, that not only did she actually then, in terms of her article, do the one thing which she said she shouldn't do, let's stop viewing this in this narrow lens, but open it up. Well, she opened it up where it suited her socio-political perspective, but not where it didn't. But she didn't have the self-awareness. She actually quoted an example of a guy who'd been raped, but then totally forgot about the fact that men can be raped and made this an issue of hatred of women and of girls and of male perpetrators and female victims. So she ignored just the person who she said, wow, this is the kind of person we shouldn't be ignoring. I found that really enlightening, that. So that was the first thing. The second thing was something that's concerned me. I've not talked about this kind of Muslim rape gang thing, but something that concerns me is that I think in some ways what we see is the tip of the iceberg, and I'm concerned maybe unlike Sargon's take on this, one thing I'm kind of not concerned about is that I think as a society, actually, we are taking this seriously. And quite a lot of people have been prepared to come out and say, actually, I think that in this instance, there are particular cultural issues, and that it behooves a particular culture to deal with those issues on its own basis, because it's only that culture that can deal with those perspectives, I think. But it's not gone beyond the rape gangs. It's very much polarised, the issue. And we know that these issues are not polarised. If we were talking about non-Muslims and the hatred of Pakistani men particularly, and Muslim individuals within the United Kingdom, and especially when it's coming from white communities. Of course, it can certainly come from Hindu and Sikh communities in just the same way, but we tend not to focus on that quite so much, although we ought to, because there's real tensions there as well. But what we know is, for every white guy that picks up a brick and throws it through the window of a mosque or punches a Muslim in the face, we know that the opinions and the motivations that lie behind that, for every guy who's then prepared to take those motivations and enact an act of violence on the basis of it, there are 1,000 other white men and women that have the same perspectives, the same, I would say, twisted perspectives, but don't act upon them. And the thing is, we're not scared to say that. Right, and we're not scared to see that as an issue of attitude that we need to tackle. And that's a good thing. Right, I think that's a good thing. But what I see with these rape gangs is that it's almost as if, yeah, we're going to be really, really brave. And we're going to be prepared to admit that this is a problem with a particular community, and it's the Muslim community, and especially a Pakistani issue, Pakistani Muslims. But we're going to view it in a very polarised sense. So let's pretend that there's only two types of Muslim men. There are Muslim men who think that non-Muslims, and this is an issue that particularly relates to me, by the way, because if you're not aware of this, Islam has a tradition of having some tolerance and respect and affording some status to other people of the book, i.e. Jews and Christians, a lesser status to those of other religions because they don't worship the same God, they don't have some of the same prophets, such as Adam and Noah and people like that, who were prophets in both religion, in Islam and in Christianity and Judaism. And so in some ways putatively worship the same God. So then the next status down are people of other religions. But the lowest of the low, the absolute dross, are atheists that don't have a God. And in some Muslim majority countries, if you don't have a God, you have no status whatsoever. Okay, so this does have a particular relevance to me as an atheist, is that we're going to polarize this. And on the one hand, we have these Muslim men who view non-Muslims as dross, the kuffar as absolute dross, and who view Western women as sluts and scum, worthless human beings. And then there's this perfect storm of these two things. And when you mesh these two things together, of their views on non-Muslim women and on non-Muslims generally, it enables them to view these as things that they can just, sex toys that they can just abuse and rape, and there's no moral harm done because these are not moral agents that they're having sex with. It's just nothing. It's people, they may as well be non-humans for all they're concerned. And so we've got that group, and then we've got all the other Muslims, and all the other Muslims are totally separate to that. That can't be the case, can it? This is my issue with this, is that simply cannot be the case. Because you know as well as I do, it just has to be the case that for every Muslim man that has those attitudes and is prepared to act upon them and risk jail, right, and risk social castigation by acting upon them, there has to be 10, 100, 1,000, who knows, other Muslim men and women who have the same perspectives but wouldn't act upon them, who don't carry out the crime. Just the same as it is with white people, that for every guy who will throw a brick through a mosque window, there are 10, 100, 1,000 other people that has the same mentality, that has the same sympathies, but doesn't act upon them. But unlike with the throwing the brick through the mosque window, it seems that with this Muslim issue of the rape gangs, that's all we're focused on. We're only interested in stopping the rape gangs, and there doesn't seem to be very much concern with the social attitudes that underpin it, and how much more prevalent those social attitudes must be. Of course, we're not talking about all Muslim men or all Pakistani Muslim men or all Pakistani Muslims, and I'm sure there are many of them who don't have any of these attitudes whatsoever. But there has to be, come on, we need to accept that there has to be a large number, significantly larger than the number that we're finding that are taking part in these rape gangs. And I think that is something of concern, and it's an even bigger concern that still seems to be, even though this is happening, something that we're not prepared to start talking about as a society. Okay, that's with regard to that video. He also made a video with Contrapoints, a podcast stream, whatever the fuck you want to call it, I don't know. And I found it kind of interesting. I slightly disagreed with Thunderfoot, fucking hell, with Sargon of Akkad on one point, and that was to do with marriage and how marriage will solve all the problems. What he was saying is that he was talking about black communities, I think, within the United States. I don't know the stats. He was giving the stats. Contrapoints wasn't countering anything was saying and saying those stats are wrong, so I'll take them on board. That it seems to be that the rise in crime in black communities, as that's gone up, marriage rates have gone down. Ergo, we know that just because that correlation doesn't necessarily equal causation, but the argument is that as marriage rates have declined, that there aren't these father figures there to provide guidance, and that's part of it, the breakdown of the family that's led to those problems. I'm prepared to take that on board. That seems a reasonable argument, and I'm sure that's probably one of the factors that's involved with that. What I disagreed with Sargon on that is that his answer to that was that it's got to be marriage. Right, that's the answer. That we need more marriage, especially in all these broken communities, but particularly he sees it in black communities in the United States. He sees that as the solution to the problem. It might well be a solution to the problem. It might well solve the problem. But I think there's another underlying thing which was missing in that. And that's because I think marriage papered over a crack. And the crack in this particular case is the status of fathers and fatherhood, which is something, it's a drum that I've beaten on before, which is that effectively fathers are regarded as kind of second-class parents, and that the relationship that mothers have with their children is seen by society as sacrosanct. Whereas the relationship that fathers have with their children instead is contingent on their relationship with the mother. So that in the event of a breakdown of the relationship between the mother and the father, the mother's relationship with the children is largely unaffected by that, other than the practicalities of it all. Whereas the relationship that the father has then becomes very heavily contingent upon the whims of the mother. And if the mother doesn't really want the father to have a relationship with his children, then he's going to struggle to have much of a relationship with his children. And then you get into this business, which I've talked about before, which is actually observed with mothers as well. When mothers think that their children may be taken into social care, so effectively they get put in the same position that fathers are in, that their relationship with their children becomes sacrosanct no longer and becomes contingent upon the whim of something else, that they start to detach a little bit from the children. So we have this kind of double whammy, I think, with fathers. Whereas, because the way that society has viewed fatherhood, that that when a marriage breaks down or when a marriage doesn't exist, fathers tend not to play a very active role in their children's upbringing, and that shouldn't be dependent upon marriage. And you can see how it's a double whammy. It's a double whammy because on the one hand we have society having that as a general attitude. We have courts in the event of a marriage breakdown making these kinds of decisions which disenfranchise fathers from their children to a much greater extent than mothers. And then we also have the empowerment of mothers and a lot being left to the whim of the mother as to how much fathers get to see their children, which means that I think fathers are already in a position. I think perhaps, as a father who tries to do his very, very best to be the best father that I can be, I can tell that evolution has already encumbered me to some extent in terms of bonding with my child, in that I don't have that initial bond that my wife has. She could have sat with our baby boy on her knee 24 hours a day and never got bored with it, whereas I didn't kind of have quite the same emotional bond. And I think that's very, very typical of fathers with young children. And that's something that as a father you have to maybe work on a little bit more, because you've not had that child growing in your stomach and all the hormones that are involved in pregnancy and childbirth and trying to suckle that child or wean that child or what have you. Wean's not the word, to suckle that child for a period of time and all that kind of thing. So you've already got that against you. And when you've got this other societal attitude against you and your kind of secondary status as a father, I think what that means is that in event of a breakdown, whether it's a breakdown of a marriage or of two young parents that aren't married, that fathers feel, well, okay, the relationship has broke down. I'm supposed to kind of go away now. And I have a financial responsibility perhaps, but I'm very much secondary now. I'm very much peripheral to this child. Even if I don't really want to be. Even if I want to be very much just as much the parent of the mother, well, society isn't viewing it that way. And with the best will in the world, unless the mother views it that way, however much you view it that way as a father, the brutal reality is it ain't going to fucking happen. So almost for kind of self-preservation purposes, that is adding on to any sort of subconscious evolutionary differences that you've had to begin with to make things even worse. I've got to be realistic about this when I criticise Sargon and talking about marriage as the thing. I don't think marriage is the biggest thing here. I think that marriage rates have gone down whilst we've maintained those traditional perspectives on fatherhood. If we could lose those traditional perspectives on fatherhood and try and grant fathers more status in the way that we view fathers and the rights that we give fathers, then I think that would really, really help. Maybe wouldn't go all the way, right? It maybe wouldn't go all the way, but it would go some of the way. I don't think marriage is required. What is required is fathers maintaining a very, very active role, not just a financial role, but a very active role in their children growing up. And whilst ever we have this societal attitude that effectively fathers are second-class parents and only really are going to get to see their children as much as their mother wills it, and that's certainly the way that it happens in the United Kingdom, because even if a court order is made, if a mother chooses to disobey it, all that happens is another court order is made. And if the mother chooses to disobey it, all that happens is another court order is made. So effectively, it's at the whim of the mother. If it functions the same in the United States, you can see kind of where this ends up. And so I don't think this is just an issue of marriage. I think it's an issue of how we viewed fathers tied in to the death of marriage or the disintegration and the lower rates of marriage and the higher divorce rates and all that kind of thing. And I don't know whether we need to go all the way to marriage, because I don't know whether we're going to get there, Sargon. I don't know whether that's going to happen. And I think that we could undo a lot of maybe what has been done by taking steps to stop viewing fathers as second-class parents. That would do a lot of the good that marriage was doing. Okay, that's what I wanted to say with regard to that. In terms of what I've got coming up this month, I recorded a video the other day. If you like to see me get angry and agitated towards the end of a video, it's probably a good one to watch. I've not edited it yet, but I have recorded it. And it's one of these videos responding to something which was one of the worst examples I've seen recently, or one of the most irritating examples of where several people effectively regard social engineering as trumping science. This is how we would like society to be, so this is how society must be represented, even if the majority of science would seem to suggest that it's wrong. Bollocks to science in that case. Let's forget about the science and let's have Santa Claus for adolescents, I suppose, is what you could call it. So yeah, that's the next video that will be up. And then a couple of videos on religion, one of them to do with statistics within the United Kingdom. The latest statistics showing again another increase in irreligiosity within the United Kingdom, and putting those statistics in the context of the last 30 years. And then a response to Deconverted Man, who made one of these videos. There's been so many of them over the years of kind of, as an atheist, what would you say if God existed? Well, he says, what would I say if Jesus existed? What would I say to Jesus? He gave his response, and as a fellow atheist, I don't think my response could be further apart from his response. So that's kind of going to be an interesting video to make there. That's what I've got coming up. Okay, bit of a ramble this, but I hope you found something, got something interesting out of this. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.